The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Barron Trump, towering and poised at 6 feet 7 inches, stepped to the defendant's podium. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward, eyebrows raised, and cracked, "You know this isn't a reality show, Mr. Trump?" The room chuckled, but Barron didn't flinch. Instead, he placed a single flash drive on the evidence table. "This isn't about me," he replied quietly. "It's about what's been buried for years." Before the judge could respond, former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi entered through the back, flanked by 2 federal marshals. Her eyes locked with Judge Caprio's. "We need to pause this hearing," she said. "There's been a development." Moments later, the courtroom's focus shifted, not to the defendant, but to the judge himself. The truth was more tangled than anyone imagined. Before we begin, drop your location in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next in Judge Caprio's courtroom. That morning in Providence Municipal Court, the rhythm was steady and familiar. The soft shuffle of papers, the occasional cough, and the low murmur of people waiting their turn created a hum of procedural monotony. Judge Frank Caprio, seated high behind the polished wooden bench, had already worked through half a docket filled with the usual: a handful of speeding violations, several overdue parking tickets, and a man insisting a no parking sign had been obscured by a tree branch. It was a typical day. Then everything shifted. The door at the back of the courtroom opened, and in stepped a figure that didn't belong in this setting, not because of who he was, but because of how he carried himself. Tall, poised, and unaccompanied, Barron Trump walked in with quiet purpose. He wore a slim black suit, no tie, no flourish. Under his arm, a worn manila envelope. His face was calm, unreadable, a mixture of steely resolve and practiced composure. There were no cameras following him, no Secret Service visible in the room. Just him and the envelope. The quiet buzz of the courtroom abruptly hushed, replaced by gasps, whispers, and exchanged glances. "Is that who I think it is? Barron Trump? What's he doing here?" The clerk's voice was the only one that remained steady as she called the next case. Case 30,288B. Defendant, Barron William Trump. Citation, improper lane change. A low ripple of disbelief moved through the room. There had to be a mistake. Judge Caprio blinked, leaned back slightly in his chair, and adjusted his glasses with a bemused smile creeping across his face. It wasn't every day the youngest son of a former president appeared in his courtroom, much less on a mundane traffic charge. "Well," Judge Caprio said with a warm, amused tone, "I never thought I'd be saying this in my courtroom. Mr. Trump, what brings you to little old Providence?" Barron approached the defendant's podium with quiet confidence. His posture was perfect. No signs of entitlement, no arrogance, just calm determination. He gave a respectful nod before speaking. "Just clearing my name, Your Honor," he said, "and maybe a few others while I'm at it." There was something about his voice, low, deliberate, that made even the stenographer pause her typing for a beat. Judge Caprio chuckled lightly, clearly intrigued. "Well now, let's not make a federal case out of a traffic ticket." But even he didn't realize this wasn't going to be just another traffic hearing. In fact, it was about to become something much larger. Barron placed the manila envelope gently on the podium, tapping it once before sliding it forward slightly, not opening it yet, just letting it sit like a silent promise of revelations to come. His gaze didn't waver from the judge, but his expression hinted at something deeper, an unspoken complexity behind this appearance, a reason that had little to do with crossing lanes and everything to do with crossing lines no one expected him to even acknowledge. The court clerk exchanged a look with the bailiff. The judge, still smiling, glanced down at the docket again as if to confirm what he already knew. Improper lane change, huh? He said. Well, Mr. Trump, you're certainly creating a bit of traffic in this courtroom. Light laughter rippled through the spectators, but the atmosphere remained oddly electric. There was tension beneath the surface, a sense that everyone in the room was standing at the edge of something much bigger than they could see. And Barron? He stood still, composed, waiting for the judge to invite him to speak, waiting for the story to unfold. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, eyes twinkling but focused. All right then, let's take a closer look at what happened here. And just like that, the gavel of routine was lifted and replaced with something entirely different. The courtroom was no longer just a place for parking fines and minor citations. It was about to become a stage for something extraordinary. Judge Frank Caprio leaned back in his chair, the worn wood creaking softly beneath him. He picked up the citation again, eyes scanning the details. Then, with a slight flick of his wrist, he flipped the paper toward the court clerk. Says here, he began, his voice steady but curious. You crossed a double yellow line near Federal Hill. The officer who issued this citation called it reckless driving. Care to explain, Mr. Trump? Barron stepped forward calmly and placed the manila envelope carefully on the bench. Without breaking eye contact, he slid it across toward Judge Caprio. Inside are screenshots from the traffic cameras at the intersection, Barron said evenly. Also dashcam footage from my vehicle. The truth is, I didn't cross the line. I was forced to swerve because a municipal garbage truck veered abruptly into my lane without signaling. Judge Caprio arched a single eyebrow, impressed. Well, you've certainly come prepared. Most people plead ignorance, or they come in asking for mercy. Barron's lips curled slightly, his tone dry. I've learned not to expect mercy. The judge nodded slowly and gestured to the court clerk. All right, let's take a look. The clerk inserted a USB drive into the court's computer. Moments later, the courtroom screen lit up with grainy video. The dashcam footage showed Barron's car driving down the street, calm at first, when suddenly a large green municipal garbage truck jerked sharply into his lane without any signal. Barron's vehicle swerved instinctively to avoid a collision, crossing the double yellow line momentarily. Judge Caprio leaned forward, watching intently. Looks like we've got a clear case for dismissal here, he said thoughtfully. But before he could continue, Barron raised a hand. That's not why I'm here, Your Honor, Barron said quietly. Please play the audio clip on the drive. The judge blinked in surprise but nodded, motioning to the clerk to play the next file. The courtroom speakers crackled and a voice filled the room. It was raspy, tense, and unmistakably Judge Caprio's. Listen, the voice said. The trust money goes through the Calibri Fund first. Nobody will trace it back to the courthouse. The girl has no clue what she signed. The courtroom erupted in shocked gasps. Whispered conversations bounced off the walls like thunder. Judge Caprio's face drained of color, his usual calm shattered. He slammed his fist on the bench. That's fabricated, he barked, voice rising sharply. This is outrageous. This is a setup, an attack on my integrity. Barron's gaze didn't waver. Check the metadata, Your Honor, he said softly but firmly. The recording is time-stamped and geotagged. It was pulled directly from your own courthouse server at 2:14 a.m. last Tuesday. No VPN, no edits, no signs of tampering. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Everyone stared at the judge as if seeing him for the first time. Judge Caprio's hands trembled slightly, but his voice returned steadier, though laced with disbelief. This can't be true, he murmured, rubbing his temples. Why would anyone do this? Barron took a deep breath. Because there's a lot more at stake here than a traffic ticket. I'm not just fighting for my innocence. I'm trying to expose something bigger, a pattern of corruption I believe you need to address. Murmurs grew louder. The bailiff glanced nervously at the courtroom doors, as if expecting someone to burst in. The judge looked at Barron, the weight of the moment sinking in. "You came here with a traffic violation," Caprio said slowly, "and brought a bombshell instead." Barron nodded. Sometimes what seems like a small thing is just the surface of a much deeper problem. The judge sighed deeply, his eyes scanning the courtroom, then settling back on Barron. "All right, Mr. Trump," he said. "We'll look into this thoroughly. But first, we resolve this traffic citation, fairly, and based on the facts." Barron's expression softened slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor. That's all I ask." The courtroom was quiet now, anticipatory, charged with an unspoken understanding. This case had evolved beyond simple traffic laws into a trial of truth, trust, and justice. And Judge Caprio, despite the shock and the challenge, was ready to face it head-on. For most people, Barron Trump was just a name, a symbol of wealth, political dynasties, and privilege. The youngest son of one of the most controversial figures in recent American history, he was often seen through the lens of tabloid headlines or political commentary. Yet few truly understood who he was beneath that public image. Behind the polished suit and the carefully controlled composure was a young man who had spent much of his teenage years far from the public eye. In boarding schools, tucked away from the relentless glare of the press, shielded from the scandals and uproar swirling around his family. The boy who'd grown up in marble halls and sprawling estates had learned early how to be invisible, how to blend into the background. What the world didn't see were the nights Barron spent alone in those grand, echoing corridors, the weight of isolation pressing down on him like a suffocating silence. The tears he wiped away in private, away from cameras and gossip columns. The whispered conversations behind closed doors, the accusations and assumptions tied to his name long before he was even legally an adult. He didn't want the spotlight, didn't crave fame. What he yearned for was something far rarer: to matter, to be seen as more than just an extension of a family name, to make a difference on his own terms. And in his own quiet, relentless way, Barron had come to understand the true nature of the world he inhabited, not from the outside looking in, but from within the very halls of power he was born into. He saw the cracks in the system, the corruption festering quietly beneath polished surfaces. It wasn't some distant, abstract problem. It was real, close, personal. Over the past 2 years, he had spent countless hours gathering evidence, quietly, meticulously, using old contacts he'd made, reaching out to whistleblowers from the lower courts, people afraid but desperate to be heard. He harnessed his tech skills, honed from years spent online, not to tweet or post, but to hack through layers of secrecy and deceit. It was a mission to escape the spotlight, even while shining a light on what needed to be exposed. He leaned forward slightly now, voice steady but filled with quiet conviction. "I'm not here to take down a judge," Barron said. "I'm here to finish what my father couldn't, draining the swamp." The courtroom held its breath. The phrase hung heavy, charged with history and irony. Barron's words were not empty rhetoric. They carried the weight of personal pain, frustration, and a desperate hope for change. And then, just as the silence began to settle, the courtroom doors opened quietly, and Pam Bondi stepped inside. Her presence was immediately felt. Former Florida Attorney General, now a legal consultant with a reputation for no-nonsense integrity. She wasn't here by accident. The murmurs among those present rose as she approached the bench, her gaze sharp but measured. Barron looked up at her and nodded slightly, as if this moment had been planned long before today. Judge Caprio, still recovering from the shock of the audio, watched the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He knew this case had just shifted into territory far beyond a simple traffic citation. Pam Bondi spoke clearly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Your Honor, I'm here on behalf of the state. We've been monitoring this investigation. What Mr. Trump has uncovered raises serious questions, questions that go beyond any one courtroom or any one official." She turned to Barron. "We're here to ensure that truth and justice aren't buried by those who benefit from silence." Barron's face, so composed just moments before, softened for the first time. There was relief there, not just for the legal support, but for finally having someone willing to stand with him in this fight. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses and addressed the court. "Well, it seems this case just got a lot bigger than a lane change on Federal Hill. Let's proceed with caution, and with honesty." The courtroom shifted, the energy changing from shock to determination. Barron Trump wasn't just a defendant now. He was a young man with a mission, one that could reshape the very justice system itself. And the court was about to witness a story that no one would forget. Judge Frank Caprio rose slowly from his bench. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath in that quiet moment, the usual rustle of papers and murmurs fading into a heavy stillness. His hands trembled slightly, a subtle but unmistakable sign that the weight of what had just been revealed was pressing down on him harder than any gavel ever could. Pam Bondi stepped closer to the bench, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The judge nodded, his eyes narrowing as he took in her words. Then, with a sudden movement, he lowered himself back down into his seat, hard, with a sound that echoed like the very gravity of the moment. He looked past Barron, past the court clerk, his gaze settling on the flags that hung above the courtroom, the stars and stripes, the symbol of justice and the nation's ideals. "There's a reason people trusted me," Judge Caprio said, his voice low and gravelly, cracking with a raw honesty that surprised everyone. "It wasn't just kindness, it was accountability. And if I failed that, if I failed this bench, then I failed the very system I swore to uphold." His words lingered in the air, heavy and profound. This was not the speech of a man defending his honor. It was the confession of a man wrestling with the deep, painful contradictions of power and responsibility. Pam Bondi stepped forward, addressing the courtroom with her trademark clarity and authority. "We've had an ongoing investigation into financial misappropriation within judicial nonprofit funnels, money that should have gone to public programs, instead redirected," she explained. "Until now, we lacked the smoking gun. Thanks to Mr. Trump, we finally have concrete evidence." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The implications were staggering. This was no longer just about one man's traffic ticket or a simple accusation of lane changing. It was about a systemic breach of trust at the heart of the judicial system itself. Judge Caprio sighed deeply, a weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "Even the best intentions can get swallowed up in power," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We come here hoping to do good, to be fair, to serve justice. But sometimes, the system can corrode even the strongest resolve." For a moment, the judge was no longer the authoritative figure in a black robe commanding the courtroom. He was simply a man, wearied by a lifetime spent balancing justice and politics, ideals and compromises, public trust and personal conscience. He looked directly at Barron now, his expression softer, tinged with a complex mix of respect and sorrow. "You've shown courage, young man, not just to stand here and tell the truth, but to carry this burden in the first place. It's not easy to fight a system built to protect itself." Barron met the judge's gaze steadily. "It shouldn't be easy," he replied, "but it has to be done." Judge Caprio turned back to the court clerk, then to the courtroom audience, the full weight of the moment settling over everyone present. "This case," he declared, "is no longer about a traffic violation. It's about restoring faith, faith in our courts, in our leaders, and in the promise of justice itself." He paused, then added with quiet conviction, "We must remember that justice is not blind to truth, nor deaf to accountability. It demands both kindness and courage." As the judge's words echoed through the room, the atmosphere shifted from shock to solemn determination. The courtroom was no longer just a venue for legal proceedings. It had become a crucible for truth and integrity. Barron's story, once dismissed as the concerns of a privileged youth, was now a rallying call to action. Judge Caprio, despite the heavy toll of what lay ahead, knew that the true work was only just beginning. And in that moment, beneath the weight of history and expectation, the judge embraced his role not just as arbiter, but as a guardian of justice's fragile promise. Pam Bondi moved decisively to the center of the courtroom, pulling a stack of thick manila folders from a black briefcase. She began laying them out carefully on the judge's bench, the weight of the documents echoing the gravity of the situation. "Your Honor," Bondi said, voice steady but tinged with urgency, "we have uncovered extensive financial records, including bank transfers, email chains, and grant proposals that were falsified." She gestured toward the large courtroom monitors that flickered to life behind her. One by one, slides illuminated the room. The first image displayed a detailed chart tracing municipal funds earmarked for youth outreach programs. Instead of going to community centers and scholarships, the money had been siphoned off, funneled through a web of shell companies, and ultimately landing in offshore accounts. The next slide showed incriminating emails between city officials, judges, and unknown intermediaries, all discussing how to divert these funds while maintaining plausible deniability. Judge Caprio's usually composed demeanor tightened. His name wasn't the only one highlighted. The documents implicated several other judges and city officials, all tied to a secretive political action committee called the Liberty Bench Initiative. Bondi's voice lowered, emphasizing the next piece of evidence. "And here is the linchpin." The monitor displayed a scanned copy of a check, dated 2018, made out to an unnamed account. The check bore what appeared to be Judge Caprio's signature. Accompanying it was a document authorizing a payment, a bribe. Caprio's breath hitched. His gaze fell on the image, and he spoke softly, almost in disbelief. "I never signed that." Barron nodded solemnly. "You didn't, Your Honor. I brought in a handwriting analyst. The signature was forged. Someone created it to implicate you." The courtroom was silent, the weight of the revelation settling over every face. For a moment, even Bondi, so fierce and unflinching, looked visibly shaken. "So?" she murmured, exchanging a glance with Barron. "The rabbit hole goes deeper than we thought." Judge Caprio's hands gripped the sides of the bench, steadying himself. "This is no longer a case about a traffic ticket," he said, voice stronger now, "but a crime scene." The atmosphere shifted dramatically. What had started as a simple dispute about an improper lane change had exploded into an unfolding scandal that threatened to upend the local justice system. Barron looked out over the courtroom, eyes burning with a mix of resolve and exhaustion. "We're dealing with a conspiracy to corrupt justice," he said quietly, "and the system's own safeguards have been compromised." Judge Caprio met his gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a mutual understanding of the peril and responsibility that lay ahead. Bondi returned to the bench, her voice steady but resolute. "Your Honor, this evidence will require a thorough investigation with transparency and urgency. We owe it to the public to follow the truth wherever it leads." Caprio nodded, the gravity of his role sinking in deeper than ever before. "Agreed. We must protect the integrity of this court, no matter the cost." As the courtroom monitors faded to black, The case was no longer about Barron's innocence or guilt on a traffic matter. It had become a battle for justice itself. Outside, the city of Providence went about its day, unaware that within these walls a reckoning was underway, one that could redefine the meaning of truth, accountability, and power. And for Judge Caprio and Barron Trump, the road ahead was uncertain, but the commitment to uncovering the whole truth was undeniable. Judge Frank Caprio rose slowly from his bench, the courtroom's charged silence settling around him like a heavy cloak. His face was grave but resolute, the weariness of years of public service etched in every line. For a moment, he looked less like the seasoned arbiter of justice and more like a man confronting the full weight of his own legacy. "I've always told people," Caprio began, his voice steady but filled with heartfelt sincerity, "that mercy is strength." He paused, searching the room, then continued, "But today, I need to ask for something else, clarity." His gaze fixed on Barron Trump, the young man who had, against all odds, brought the truth into this courtroom like a beacon. "You came in here not to deflect, not to hide, but to protect people from what I didn't see, or perhaps didn't want to see," Caprio said, his tone softening. "For that, you've done what few can. You've shown courage to confront the uncomfortable truth." There was a solemn nod from Barron, who had carried the burden of this fight quietly for so long. Pam Bondi stepped forward, authoritative yet respectful, addressing the court with the weight of official sanction behind her words. "Effective immediately, Judge Frank Caprio is being relieved of his duties pending a full and independent investigation into the allegations," she announced. "However, based on the evidence surfaced so far, it appears he may be more a victim of manipulation and deception than a perpetrator." Caprio nodded slowly, accepting the judgment with the dignity of a man who understood the cost of truth. "I will face it, all of it," he said quietly, voice firm despite the vulnerability beneath. Then, with a small but meaningful smile, he turned to Barron. "You want to matter, son? You already do." The judge reached for his robe, the symbol of his office and authority. In a gesture heavy with significance, he removed it and carefully handed it over to the court clerk. The courtroom rose as one. An unexpected wave of applause filled the room. But this was not applause for a fall from grace. It was a tribute to courage, to accountability, and to the enduring power of truth. Among the spectators, whispers of respect and hope stirred like a gentle breeze, carrying the unspoken promise that justice, though sometimes fragile, could still prevail. Barron stood quietly, watching as Judge Caprio left the bench, his expression a mix of relief and resolve. He knew this was not the end of the journey, but it was a vital turning point. Outside the courthouse, the world buzzed on, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just taken place inside these walls. But inside, a new chapter was beginning, one shaped by bravery, integrity, and the belief that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. Judge Caprio's story was now part of that larger narrative, a testament to the complexity of justice, the weight of responsibility, and the human capacity for redemption. And as the courtroom slowly emptied, the final echoes of that applause lingered, a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies in owning the truth, however difficult it may be. Barron Trump, once a symbol of privilege and controversy, had become a catalyst for change. And Judge Caprio, the wise and compassionate judge who had shown mercy to so many, had now shown it to himself in the form of honesty and courage. Together, they had taken the first step toward cleansing a system long in need of renewal. And in that moment, justice felt a little closer to being whole again. Outside the courthouse, a swarm of reporters and camera crews waited like vultures circling their prey. Flashbulbs popped, questions shouted over one another, each reporter desperate for a statement, a soundbite, a glimpse behind the headlines. But Barron Trump said nothing. His expression was unreadable, calm and resolute. Without hesitation, he walked past the sea of microphones, ignoring the frantic calls of the press. The cold Providence air bit at his face, his black suit wrinkled from the long day, but his posture was unwavering, his spine impossibly straight. He moved with quiet dignity, a young man who had just carried a burden far heavier than a traffic violation and was determined to see justice done, no matter how high the stakes. Inside the courthouse, the reverberations of the day's revelations began to ripple outwards like waves on a still pond. Within hours, the city administration ordered comprehensive new audits of all municipal funds, especially those linked to the justice system. The fallout was swift and decisive. Several judges quietly announced early retirements. Oversight committees were formed, tasked with rooting out corruption and restoring public trust. The notorious Liberty Bench Initiative PAC, once a shadowy force pulling strings behind closed doors, was dissolved within the week. Its leaders faced federal inquiries, and the public outcry fueled a larger conversation about transparency and reform. Judge Caprio's story didn't end with his removal. Months later, he returned to the public eye, not from a courtroom, but a university lecture hall. At Roger Williams University, he began teaching ethics and constitutional law, channeling his decades of experience into inspiring a new generation of lawyers and judges. Caprio's message was clear. Justice is a living, breathing ideal that must constantly be examined and defended, not just by those who wield the gavel, but by the communities they serve. The story that began with a simple traffic citation had blossomed into something much larger, a powerful reminder that even the most trusted halls of power must be questioned and held accountable. It was a story about how the system can be vulnerable, how power can corrupt, but also about how courage, integrity, and relentless pursuit of truth can prevail. And it was about Barron Trump, once dismissed by many as just the privileged son of a controversial family, who chose to use his position not for silence or escape, but to shine a light on the shadows within the system. Sometimes, the ones we expect to hide behind privilege are the ones who fight hardest to make things right. As the courthouse doors closed that day, the people of Providence were left with a renewed hope that justice could be fair and true, and that even in the face of power, accountability will find a way. The case of Barron Trump and Judge Caprio wasn't about a traffic ticket. It was about justice, imperfect, challenging, but ultimately worth fighting for. What would you have done if you were in Barron Trump's shoes? Would you have exposed the truth even if it meant accusing a beloved figure like Judge Caprio? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. If you believe in truth, justice, and second chances, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a moment from inside this courtroom. Because sometimes, the biggest trials aren't about guilt or innocence, but about courage. See you in the next case.